Nothing contained in this podcast should be considered a substitute for professional medical advice. This content does not represent our respective employers and is purely the opinion of the podcast hosts. We are not your personal medical providers. Sorry, friends. So, if you have any questions or concerns or seeking advice, diagnosis, and or treatment, please seek individual, personalized advice from a healthcare provider in your area. We are not liable for any risks or issues associated with using or acting upon the information contained in this podcast. This is intended for educational and entertainment purposes only, so enjoy the ride. Welcome to Medical Media Mixer, the perfect cocktail. I'm Nicole Peniston, licensed psychologist.
And I'm Tara Prisco, physician assistant. So cheers. I feel like I haven't actually chatted with you in a week or two, right? I was away.
My drink is
We're doing virtual cheers. Our virtual cheers doesn't work out because when I go and edit it and then I put it up and down, it doesn't match the side to side that we're doing. Or sometimes it switches us, so we're on the opposite side. So even if I kept it the other way, it looks like we're
cheersing invisible people above us and below us. That's okay. Cheers to everyone all around.
First taste of the drink. It is interesting. It is strong.
Mine is very strong. It's got 35 ingredients.
Mine has 3, but it's all alcohol. So.
Mine's mostly alcohol.
Nice.
I got to open that giant bottle of vodka that I won.
Ooh, exciting. I had to go buy Tito's actually this week because I was like, I'm running out of alcohol. Yeah. So actually that brings me to one thing that I decided that I was going to jump into Chat GPT and have it give us ideas on things to do with the pod. Uh-oh. So I had a nice conversation with Chat GPT today. Actually, it was super helpful. It actually was. And I screenshotted a bunch of stuff. So we'll have to chit chat later about some ideas. But one of the things was because I was like, we need to start funding the alcohol purchases. Because I went to the liquor store and I was like, oh God, I have to get this ingredient and this ingredient. And I was like, this is getting expensive.
It really is. Drinking is not a cheap person's pastime.
No, especially
it's funny. I also had a foray with ChatGPT today as well.
Okay.
Because I haven't mentioned this much on the pod, but I attend Comic-Con every year. And in New York Comic-Con, NYCC. And I have been trying desperately for the past about 3 years to present a panel at Comic-Con about something psychologically related. And so I had some ideas and I'm always like, maybe my write-up isn't sexy enough. Maybe my title isn't sexy enough. That's why I don't get picked. So I threw all my brainstorm ideas into ChatGPT and it gave me some good stuff. So fingers crossed, I'll be presenting in New York in October.
That would be awesome. That would be a super amazing. Then I have to get a costume and come.
Yeah, obviously. Well, you have to buy tickets
now.
Next month. So if you want to come, let me know. And I'll grab you a ticket.
It's in October usually, right?
Yes, October 9th to the 12th this year.
Right around my birthday.
Yeah.
Libra season. Yes, ChatGPT, the first time I used it, I was fighting with it because I was trying to do that thing I sent you, to try and make the action figure that was a trend, which by the time I actually post it, it won't be a trend anymore.
Well, and I still didn't do mine yet.
You didn't do it.
I don't know how to do those things.
I was fighting with it because then it would come out with something really bizarre and weird. It's good for words, not so good for pictures sometimes. It would be the stethoscope was meh, or the words were spelled wrong. And I was like, stop doing this. But this time it was good, so I'll have to share with you all of my. I had a business pod meeting with ChatGPT. So.
Okay, well, do we need to put ChatGPT on the payroll?
No, it needs to get us a payroll.
Yeah, we definitely need that.
Actually, one of the things though, is about trying to partner with other podcasts, and I was trying to search for I have ones I listen to, but other ones are closely related to what we do. And I found one that I just listened to an episode and a half of, so I'm going to feel them out a little and then we'll chat about it. But I feel like they fit our vibe and our topics and the whole thing. So maybe we could do some cross, if they like us and they want to do that, but some, cross promotion.
Why wouldn't they?
I don't know. You're right. We are special.
I do have a question for you, though.
Yes, ma'am.
Any bumps in our listenership lately? We've been doing a lot of in-person marketing lately. Any changes?
So actually,
new listeners out there, hopefully.
We have like some new actual like random countries listening. The US stuff, you know what I think it is? I think a lot of people we know in person are like, sure, I'll listen. They listen to episode 2, but they're not just, it's not in their routine to be a podcast listener. Like if you aren't already one, it's like may or may not be your thing. I have a few who've done that, but I haven't seen a huge, like that was part of my look for today was like, what do we need to do to like mobilize things a little more? I think what we're doing is really cool, but I just feel like we're stuck. We're a little stagnant. Like we have consistent people, but not like growth. But I did on some random site, I texted you this, that I was looking and you can find stats outside of our own stats that I get. And that we were the 125th best medical podcast in Malaysia. And we have exactly
got 124 other folks ahead of us in Malaysia alone
in medical podcasts. We have 7 downloads. We have 7 downloads this month from Malaysia. So that's probably one person who listened to 7 episodes. Hi, Malaysian person. I like you.
There. I wish I knew the language to say hello in your native tongue, but I don't.
But you know ours and you're listening to us. And I had to I was like, I'm pretty sure I know where that is in the map. Let me go check and make sure I know for sure. I was like, I know the vicinity. And I did. And I was correct. But yeah, we had a couple of countries pop in there. I think Poland, Russia has a few more. I'm trying to think. India had a few more. So, we have some.
You know what? Maybe our listenership is international and maybe we just need to embrace that.
Right. Oh, and I told you I met a friend in Tennessee. Hi, Tammy, if you're listening. I have to email her.
Hey, Tammy, never met you, but I saw your email in our inbox and I got super excited.
And she followed us on socials. And I know that we have 2 recent listens in Tennessee. So maybe that's her. But she was a really, really fun person at a moonshine and whiskey tasting in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. She was so much fun. And so I was like, we're vibing here. I'm like, you can make some cool cocktails.
Yeah.
So we'll have to see. I'll have to email her back and reach out. But I just got back into like life after being off for a week and work. And that was enough for me.
Yeah. Well, and I'm traveling next month, so maybe I can make some outside of our state connections during
there you go. Well. Remind me where you're going. I forgot.
I'm going to Sonoma. So
oh, yes, I remember. Wine country. Oh, my God. We have to do a wine-themed stuff, too, because, like, cocktails, I don't know.
I'm fine with anything that is alcoholic.
Yeah.
Of any nature. Well, I'm not a big beer fan, but I'll take one for the team if you want to do some beer.
All right. I bet we can find... Actually... I got to find a media piece that matches this, but there is a disorder that would go with beer very well. Have you heard of auto brewery syndrome?
Yes.
Okay.
I actually have.
So
maybe where you get drunk, but you're not
drinking.
Yeah. I've heard of that before.
No, I have to
probably
find
on some true crime podcast or true crime show.
Yeah. I might have heard it on Cell Phones. I don't remember. But anyway, that's interesting. Anything good for Easter?
Just spent some time with the fam. Went to brunch with my mom on actual Easter. Hung out with my family the Saturday before Easter. And my aunt, who maybe she listens, maybe she doesn't, she said I was the most talkative that I've been. And I said it's because I've had a few drinks.
Well,
either that or because I'm practicing talking every week. So
yes. Oh my goodness.
Because my entire career is silence. That is
right.
Fact.
Yes. What's interesting is, I would say, I think people would consider you if they met you in certain circumstances as an extrovert, but I don't think you're a pure extrovert.
No, I don't think I'm an extroverted introvert.
Yeah, I'm a combo too, for sure. But I would say I do need to recharge on my own. I definitely need space and time. But in certain situations I can, but I don't think I'm not the person who will walk up and introduce myself usually in a social situation. I'm not that.
Not at all.
But it's interesting. Yeah, mixtures. I don't think that's a black and white thing,
Definitely not. But I do think I've, for a very long time, been very conscious about when I want to turn it on versus when I don't want to. I wouldn't say that I'm shy or antisocial to that effect, but definitely, you know, I find my crew and then you guys are stuck with me forever. So you're welcome.
That's it. All right. You ready to get into our crazy topics of the moment?
I am. I believe our topics are somewhat related today.
They are. We're getting sleepy.
Oh, please. I have work to do after this. I can't
Me
get
too.
too sleepy.
I did not finish all my work today, and it's been crazy. Okay, I'm just scrolling to the bottom where I can get to my cocktail. Okay, there we go.
Do you want me to pronounce it for you since you said it for me?
Yes, because you are super French.
Le Fatigue.
Okay, it's Le Fatigue. Okay, people.
Le Fatigue.
It's called Le Fatigue, a rye whiskey cocktail. It is a bold whiskey sipper to combat palate fatigue. Right? Oh, I'm just looking at the picture, actually. I just realized that mine is not the color in the picture.
What color is it supposed to be?
Well, theirs is like a reddish brown. I think it's because the maraschino liqueur I used is not colored, I assume.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
So it is 1.5 ounces of rye whiskey, which I had to go and buy because I have bourbon and I think Irish or Scottish whiskey, but I did not have rye. This is where it gets weird. 3/4 an ounce of the Angostura bitters. So like
I saw that when I was typing it in,
tiny bottle. And I was like, keep going. I've never had to use so much bitters. Usually it's 2 little shakes and that's it. And then 3/4 ounce of maraschino liqueur. So I use that Luxardo brand. Luxardo are the ones who make the really good cherries. So I was like, oh, that looks good to me. I think that's the only maraschino liqueur they had in the store anyway, but it tastes good. It tastes good. I like it. So yes, Le Fatigue. So we are going to cover. Have you watched The Sandman?
I have not. It's on my list because I really like Neil Gaiman.
Comic-based.
Yeah, and that's the funny thing. Even though a lot of his stuff is comic-based, I'm more familiar with like his film work, and I haven't really. He did. What was the one with the guy with the monster with the eyes on his hands? Oh,
I know. Yeah.
I think he wrote that. Wow.
I mean, I know American Gods.
Labyrinth? No, not Labyrinth.
No. Yeah.
Anyway, American Gods, yes. I'm familiar.
Yes, American Gods is not Angels, Demons. Angel. Oh, Good Omens. Isn't that him too? Good Omens?
Good Omens, yes.
Yes. So I've read and watched both of those. So The Sandman is another work of Neil Gaiman, however we say that, based on a comic that was out from 1989 to 1996, and it was actually published by DC. So it was picked up by a major comic company. But the TV show came out in August of 22 with 11 episodes, and supposedly a new season will be coming out this year, according to my sources. So it's an interesting concept, and I had forgotten that I had watched a significant portion of it and then hadn't watched the very end for some reason. My husband and I fell off in like the last episode. For some reason, we never finished. So I actually rewatched because I was like, let me remind myself everything. Most of what we cover in this is the first episode. So it's about Morpheus, who is basically a personification of dreams, and he's one of the 7 endless, who are sort of, they don't call them gods, but godlike. So, you know, in the world of Sandman, the human beings fall asleep. They're transported to the world of dreams and nightmares, and Dream, Morpheus, is, you know, guides them through, along with destiny, death, desire, despair, delirium, and destruction. I like that alliteration. And basically, you know, it's dreams. So in this world, the humans have a chance to play out the greatest fantasies, darkest fears that are created and managed by him. And they all basically remain within the confines of the dream world. But in the first episode of this series, something goes wrong, and a nightmare called Corinthian somehow gets out into the real world. So Dream starts hunting for him. And this takes place around 1916, so around World War I. And so it shows you in England, we meet another character a gentleman named Roderick Burgess. They call him the Magnus. He's an elderly man, very wealthy. He's grieving the loss of his son who died in the war. And he became obsessed with dark magic, and he hoped to imprison the angel of death to get his son, bring him back to life. So I know, we never want to bring people back to life. It never goes well.
Never goes the way that it's supposed to. So I think
right.
we've watched enough horror movies to know about that.
So, he takes, he teams up, we'll say, with another grieving father, John Hathaway, and he gets his hands on a book of sorcery, and he performs this ritual. And it sort of works, this magical ritual. He summons a god and traps them inside a sigil, but it's not the angel of death he catches, it's Dream, who happens to be in the human world trying to chase the other guy. And he just was trying to get that guy back, and now he's imprisoned.
Do they look alike, the angel death and him? Or it was just like
random, Dream is very...
He just grabbed whoever he could.
I think it's just magic plopped him there, but Dream is definitely very gothy looking, very,
I'm picturing like Angel of Death from American Horror Story, which like that is like a Dream Halloween costume for me. Do you remember that one? It was like 1950s black dress, like A-line petticoat, button up with a little like hat and the veil, but then big black wings.
Wings, yeah.
And red lip, of course, a red lip.
Yes. See, costume ideas.
I always have costume ideas.
So basically, Corinthian, the guy he was chasing, figures out like, hey, he's caught. I can continue to wreak havoc on Earth. And he speaks to Magnus, telling him that he's Dream, not death he's captured, and he hopes to help keep him captured. So he helps him to like make this glass sphere around him and keep him there essentially. And so Corinthian goes off to cause all kinds of stuff. Meanwhile, while Magus takes Dream's belongings, so he has very, very important belongings, a pouch of sand, an emerald necklace that prolongs the wearer's lifespan, and his creepy helm. He has like this sort of, I don't know how to describe. My hands are doing things that the podcast people can't see.
A face mask.
So it's a helm. It's kind of like a World War I era gas mask. That's what it says in the description I was reading. Once Dream wakes up, he tries to strike a deal with him in exchange for his freedom, wealth, immortality, but Dream refuses to even speak. He just sits there quietly. He sits in captivity for a decade. So.
Oh, no biggie. Just like a decade.
Chilling.
That's cool.
But while he's unable to supervise the Dream realm, all hell breaks loose, we'll say. Chaos ensues, right? So in the real world, millions of people are either unable to wake up and are trapped in an endless state of sleepwalking or sleep, or they can't sleep at all. And so I'll finish sort of the episode, but this is sort of the piece we're talking about.
So if it was you, which would you prefer?
Sleep.
Yeah, me too.
As long as I'm comfy, I'll sleep. I will sleep forever. And so this is what we're talking about, which is the mysterious sleeping epidemic, basically in the 20s and 30s. So, Dream wants to, of course, get out and fix that. And then we're also kind of watching Magus's second-born son, who's this young child. He's a kid, so he's kind of intimidated by his father. He kind of like hangs out in the big rich house, but he really wants to set Dream free. Along the way, the son meets this woman who becomes the father's mistress, and she eventually becomes pregnant. After the father, Magus, tries to force her to have an abortion, she flees and she takes money, but she also takes all of Dream's possessions, which are super important: his helm, his sand, and that necklace. Of course, the Magus is not super happy about that. And so he tries to strike a deal with Dream so that he'll hunt her down. Dream kind of sits there, stays quiet. And Alex is a little bit older, a little more bold, tries to make an arrangement. And he offers to set Dream free. But before he can respond, the father comes in and things turn violent. And the son shoves the father and accidentally kills him. So, it happens, Alex now is the man of the house. He finishes, talking to Dream, and he says he'll set him free if he promises to do no harm to him or his lover, who's a male. Dream has learned not to trust humans, so he again stays silent. Now we jump 100 years. So we jump 10 and then 100, where Alex is now an old man himself, and he's in a wheelchair. And one last time, he offers to set Dream free in exchange for he and his lover's protection. And one last time, Dream just sits there silently. But as he wheels Alex away in the wheelchair, he accidentally breaks the seal. There's like a sand seal around the glass dome that he's trapped in. And when the seal has now been broken, he chooses to kind of just keep walking and just see like if Dream will leave. So Dream zeroes in on the guards. He, of course, tricks him into shooting the glass sphere because he gets into his head. He escapes. He goes back to his dream world, and basically she tells him like, hey, all hell's breaking loose. You're going to have to go round up that Corinthian guy, and you're going to have to fix things. So that's basically the way this episode ends. This is a lot that happens in that first episode. It's like a whole movie, essentially, in that first episode. And so Dream goes off to find all of his belongings and, fix the world. So the medical part of things. It was a very long description of that, but it's an interesting episode. So we're talking about this syndrome, which is later named Encephalitis Lethargica. And it's a neurologic symptom that spread across Europe and eventually the world. And it started in 1916 to 17 and continued through the 30s. And so there, as usual, back then, they don't have the exact number of people who are afflicted, but it's estimated to be at least 1 million worldwide. So it's pretty interesting. Now, this, just to not be confused, this is not the same as the sleeping sickness, which is caused by that tsetse fly in Africa. So that's a different thing. So encephalitis lethargica is not the sleeping sickness, separate thing.
Also, I apologize to our listeners for tongue popping right into the microphone. That was inadvertent.
We probably didn't even hear it, but that's okay.
Sorry.
So there's a doctor who's sort of credited with starting to really examine this, Dr. Konstantin von Economo in Vienna. He started kind of realizing he had several patients, these unusual neurologic symptoms. They were admitted with like varying degrees of neurologic things, meningitis, things that looked like multiple sclerosis, delirium, but none of them really matched those diagnoses. And so he kind of pulled it together that maybe this is all the same thing, and it's neither of those. So the biggest thing, of course, that he noted was the lethargy. So he described and wrote a paper about this, and he named it Encephalitis Lethargica. And there's another contemporary of him who happened to, in a separate place, in a military hospital, French physician, René Cruchet, who also kind of came to the same conclusion. So it's always interesting in medicine because this happens a lot where two people in separate places around the same time come up with the same conclusions. And again, he also published his own description of the disease. And their papers, they continue to write articles and sort of spread the information around the world. Approximately 9,000 papers were published about this, which I can't think of a whole lot of rare diseases that 9,000 things are written about. And so, they did look back historically. And this reminds me of the Choreomania episode where they kind of said, well, there were other similar episodes to this. So they said the English sweats, apparently, that was a epidemic in 1529.
Problem.
Malmazuco, whatever that means, in Italy in 1597. I don't think I can pronounce this German. Okay, hold on. Let's see if I can do it.
Where is it? I want to give it a shot. Is it?
No, it's good. It's in like one of these articles that I like pasted information into my document. It's like the main article. I took everything from.
I'm in the article.
Okay. For the word. Kriebelkranheit, whatever that is. In Germany in 1672, and then Rafania in Sweden in 1754, and Nona, that means grandma, right? In Italy in
Mm-hmm.
1890. So like similar to that choreomania where there's like all these things, they were similar. We still don't really know what caused it. And they're sort of these medical epidemiologic mysteries. They kind of theorized that the movement of troops during the war sort of spread whatever this was. And yeah, and so it eventually, started in Vienna, France, then England, and eventually the US, Canada, and so on. And it peaked in the 20s, early 20s. Acute cases became less common. But there were some neurologic complications that hung around afterward. And per this article, there's been no epidemic recurrence of this since the early 20th century. They do think there might be sporadic cases, but it's never been to this level again. And so, they have these kind of different phases and these different forms of it that they categorized. So during the acute phase, it was very much excessive sleepiness. There's very particular thing about your eye motility that seems to occur with this, which is different from other diseases. I guess that's one of the things that set it apart, where their eyes would go up and sort of be locked. They would have fever, movement disorders, but it could be almost any neurologic thing could happen. And it could be shifting day to day, hour to hour. It almost feels like the brain on fire, that one. It feels like one of these things you can't put your finger on. Like it's just so all over the place that it can mimic almost anything. And then they said there was
it's funny you say that because I think there's a lot of disorders that I think people take for granted. We name a disorder after a cluster of symptoms, but when we don't have a name for it, we're just going on these symptoms, which could be occurring in like multiple different disorders. So that's why they're like saying like it's all over the place, because one symptom could happen like 16 different disorders.
Right. And we're trying to group this and define it, but some of these neurologic things are really, really tricky. So, and the chronic phase can sometimes happen months to years later and often had very Parkinsonian-like signs. So he came up with these classifications of different forms. One was called the somnolent ophthalmoplegic. So that would be somnolent, sleepy, ophthalmoplegic eye. That was the most common, and that usually developed right after that kind of initial flu-like. They were dazed, confused, delirious, had sort of similar signs to meningitis. So meningeal irritation usually would be if you move your neck, you would have pain. Cranial nerve palsy. So that would be cranial nerves. We're not going to go into all that, but you know the cranial nerves. Basically, they're all assigned to different things, usually in the head and neck area, including your eyes, your mouth, your tongue, things like that. And that would affect the eyes specifically. And then it was just this overwhelming desire to sleep. I mean, sleep for abnormally long periods of time, but they were easily awakened and aware of things that were happening while they were sleeping, which is very strange. And they did say the mortality rate for this type was pretty high. That was somewhere around 50%, which is pretty wacko. There was another form called the hyperkinetic form, which was more like a manic phase. And they had chorea, which we talked about. Go back to the choreomania episode. And a myorrhythmia of the ocular and masticatory muscles, that be your eye and your mouth muscles. So just abnormal pulsations of those muscles. More restlessness, weakness, very different.
It's reminding me a little bit about when I covered insomnia and that fatal familial insomnia. Some of those symptoms people were seeing then, but we know that that's really just in one specific genetic line.
Interesting. Yeah. And these people had like hallucinations, day and nights were mixed up. So it seems very different. I'm not sure how you even connected these two types. And then the last one was this amyostatic akinetic form, and that was the least common. Rigidity, lack of movement without weakness, very, very slow to move their posture, very sort of stiff, we'll say. And then they would have that waxy flexibility, which I feel that was also in the Brain on Fire, wasn't it?
Yes.
Where you could hold your arm up and then they could sort of move it, but like you...
Yeah, it was part of the catatonia symptoms.
Right. So they were immobile for long periods of time, but the rigidity could be overcome with slight external force. They were mentally intact, but they had a very masked faces, which is something we see in Parkinson's. So their emotions were hard to read. And that one, he actually even says right here, similar to the catatonia described in the episode, but MDMA encephalitis. See, I wrote myself a note and I forgot even wrote myself that note.
Well, and I was just thinking too, you were talking about you said something about masticatory, like the cranial nerves. If the nerves are damaged or not working to control your facial muscles, you're going to have that more blank masked expression.
Right. So it's interesting. And then the later, more Parkinson, type things is quite interesting too. And they kind of felt that about 50% of Parkinson cases in the decades following were actually related to this. So, which is interesting.
That's what I was thinking when you were talking about. I was thinking about, which I'm sure you'll get to, awakenings and things like that.
Right. So, the other thing though that was a little bit different from true Parkinson's disease. So remember, these are Parkinsonisms, so they're Parkinson's-like. They had that.
Whoever that Parkinson guy is he's got a lot of stuff named after him. So good for him.
It's true. So they would have something, these particular patients called kinesia paradoxical, in which
I've heard of that before.
Yeah, the patient was like in that sort of akinetic, not moving, and then perfectly mobile the next. So a person who struggles with walking, but you throw a ball and they run and catch it, or rescue a child who's about to fall when they were like walking slowly before that. So it's interesting. I tell you, the brain and nervous system is wacko. It really is.
It's fascinating, and it's crazy how in 2025 we still know so very little about it.
Right. And there are, of course, with anything neurologic, there can be chronic forms that have psychiatric manifestations, euphoria, increased sexual drive, hallucinations, excessive puns, joviality, and silliness. I like that part. So it was quite interesting. And then they would have these other things, these crises with the eyes, the oculogyric crisis, where that upward deviation, the eyes, and they couldn't control it. And so they were awake and conscious, but their eyes were basically stuck.
Do you think that would cause like damage to the eyes after a while? I'm just thinking of like this strain of the eyes.
The eyes are controlled by muscles. So there's some of the cranial nerves. You always have to remember all these things in school. No, I'm not going to remember. SO4, something to SO4. Anyway, superior oblique is cranial nerve fur, but I can't think of the first part right now. But, it's nerves that control those muscles. Like any muscle, I don't think there can be like a severe damage. It was the signaling that was causing it. So think about misfiring of that nerve, causing that muscle go, and just tighten up. But just like any muscle, generally it should be okay. So, one of the things, that we're going to cover separately, so we're not going to go into this, but, this is partly these patients with this Parkinsonism later is really what they were doing, trying to treat in that movie Awakenings. And when the guy developed levodopa, that doctor that you remember his name, and I don't remember his name, that you told me the other day.
Oliver Sacks.
That guy. So it was these patients later who had these chronic Parkinsonism that helped him develop levodopa, the drug that we now use for Parkinson's. And then, as far as just what causes this, we still don't know. Just like choriomania, we have a lot of theories. They do have, though, on autopsy, some actual findings of the brains. So at least we have that. So they had hyperemic meninges. So meninges is the covering of your brain. And so that would be basically swollen and redness. A soft sort of edematous, a swollen, soft, mushy brain, I guess we'll say. A reddish discoloration of the brain stem, and then certain areas like the upper midbrain, substantia nigra, showed the biggest changes, and then the basal ganglia, pons, medulla, and thalamus. So it's interesting. There was definitely inflammation in some of the blood vessels. There were hemorrhagic inflammatory lesions. The brains were kind of a mess afterward. Obviously, these patients died, so they were probably the more severe cases. And they said that when they're trying to figure out what caused this, they're like, well, we already know narcolepsy is a real disorder. We know what that is. So this is not that. And obviously, this is a lot more severe sounding than simple. Narcolepsy sounds simple compared to this. And not hypersomnolence, of other things. They really went down the road of infection, really thinking that's probably the biggest theory, that this was caused by infection. They did on some of the autopsies also see the neurofibrillary tangles, which is what we see in Alzheimer's. Mm-hmm. So that was something they did see on some of these. But basically, it's tough because they can't really tell whether they over or underdiagnosed this because it was so new. So they don't have great numbers on what that means. I think the postmortem exams were really the best thing they had to really, truly, truly diagnose it based on those features. People generally seem to be more middle-aged when they were diagnosed, though. Basically between the ages of 10 and 50 on average, and there was no sex predilection. They said that there were certain outbreaks who seemed to favor one sex more than the other. And then some reports stated that higher prevalence among Jews among natives in South Africa, India, and the Philippines. But who knows as far as counting. They've, again, theorized environmental, infectious, and autoimmunity, again, like the NDMA, whether this was a form of that. That would also be a consideration. They've ruled out food poisoning, toxic substances. There were no GI disturbances. There would often be a single case in a household.
Did they think maybe it could be a combination of things where it was an infection that then tripped off maybe some sort of autoimmune response, and that's why only certain people got it?
Right. I mean, that could be very similar to, obviously, recently, COVID, who some people got that severe inflammatory cascade and some people didn't. And so maybe, yeah, I mean, that would sort of make sense. They did, theorize that it may have been related to the Spanish flu epidemic. So that would make sense. And, they think that there were some other sleeping sickness or encephalitis that were associated with influenza. So I think that's the strongest theory, but I do agree that an autoimmunity component is probably why some people are affected and not others. So their whole house could get flu, but only this one person got that, right? That's what's interesting. Yeah, and basically studies both refute and support the influenza theory. So we really don't have an answer. Hopefully it never happens again, so we don't really have to find an answer.
And that's what I was going to say. Like, the research is kind of flawed because we only have so much data from that time that was collected and so much stuff that we can study now with this new lens. So
exactly. And some of those things that we could test for now. So you could do a PCR. You can check for if it was an infection like herpes, strep viridans, something like pandas, which we'll have to cover at some point, which is strep related. NDMA, receptor. I don't think about narcolepsy, but
narcolepsy is a different presentation.
Very different, yeah. Related to polio, they're saying maybe that. But they really
because this hasn't happened again, right? As far as an outbreak, so it could be something we vaccinated against.
Exactly. So polio would actually be a good theory in that perspective, especially because time frame and neurology and that effect in the neurologic system. So, basically treatment, there really wasn't anything they found effective. They tried everything because just like anything, you try everything in that acute period, but then if it all goes away, then we never kind of came up with a cure. And currently, since 1940,
so I guess maybe I missed when you said this. People were dying from this, or they were dying from complications of it, and then studying them postmortem.
They were dying. I mean, they were dying from this. I mean, and their brains look like mush, basically. So it
was like a direct. This exact illness caused them to die, and then afterwards we saw the damage that the illness caused to the brain versus them getting this and then getting pneumonia and dying. Or something. Right.
Exactly. No, they died from this. But since 1940, there have been 80 reports of it worldwide. So, I mean, it was 1 million back then. So,
but to still not know what caused it? 80s.
We
I
still
don't
do
want to
not.
be part of
Right.
that
I know.
80s.
In 1987, they tried to come up with some diagnostic criteria. But I guess they haven't been able to really test it out. So
Yeah,
it's
which maybe that's a good thing.
Yeah, it is like choriomania. It's in medical mystery. It's just one of those things. And it's interesting when they're epidemic like that, where it really is just so many cases and we never get the answer. But I thought it was quite interesting. So that's my story.
Very good. So I am also going to talk about sleep. The name of my cocktail is Deep Sleep. I drank almost all of it, so hopefully I don't fall asleep while I'm telling this story. I'm not tired yet, but it was very strong. So my cocktail has a bajillion ingredients. So it's 2 ounces of vodka, 0.75 ounces of yellow apple syrup. So if y'all are listening and you want to recreate this, it is not yellow apple syrup. It is apple syrup that is the color yellow, because there's some that's the color red.
Oh my goodness. Because I'd be like,
took me a little
to
while to
find
figure
yellow
that one out.
apples? It's not October. They don't have all those apple varieties in the store.
It's just, there's different colors of apple. So like there's green apple syrup that's like that bright green.
Red.
Apple syrup that's the yellow color. And really it's just because the drink turns out kind of yellowy. So if you use the other ones, it would taste the same.
Okay.
So 0.75 ounces of yellow apple syrup, 0.75 ounces of apple juice, 0.5 ounces of lemon juice, 5 ounces of actual apple. It says 0.15 ounces of rosemary, aka 1 sprig of rosemary.
Okay.
And then some ice. I know. It's the way they wrote out the ingredients is like, what is life? And then you read the recipe and you're like, oh, okay.
Oh, okay.
So you chop up half that apple into pieces. You put that and the sprig of rosemary into a shaker and you muddle it all together, which I have to tell you, aromatically, that smelled amazing. That was really nice. So then you add the lemon juice, apple juice, yellow apple syrup, and the vodka. Fill the shaker with ice, shake, finally strain, garnish with 2 apple wedges, which I already ate because my glass was chilled and then it was melting. So everything was dripping. So I ate the garnish. And then you enjoy. So it's actually really nice, really very aromatic. Like I was saying before, you can smell the rosemary and the apple is a nice scent. And it's a nice flavor. Not too sweet, not savory. It's like right in the middle.
Cool.
So I am going to be talking today about the documentary called Dead Asleep. Have you seen it?
No, I know about it, but no.
So I watched it originally when it first came out. It came out in 2021, so I saw it pretty soon after it came out on Hulu. And then when I was thinking about covering it for the pod and I started doing my research, where I always start at Wikipedia, don't judge me, and I didn't realize there was so much controversy around the documentary itself. Like the story itself is controversial, but the making of it into a documentary became like real contentious with a lot of people. So I'll tell you about the story first, and then I'll tell you why people are kind of battling the documentary. At one point, there was a petition to remove it from Hulu. Spoiler alert, it's still on there. You can find it.
Wow.
So basically, Dead Asleep is following the case of Randy Herman Jr., who supposedly killed his best friend while he was in a bout of sleepwalking. So when I heard that, like as the preview, like that was like what happened, I was like, bullshit, that is not what's happening. And the way the documentary is portrayed, it's kind of left up to the viewer to decide, even though there was a resolution to the case. They do look at both sides of it. So let me give you the rundown. So the woman who was murdered in this case, her name was Brooke Preston. And so Brooke and Randy were very good friends for quite some time. And they ended up moving in together along with Brooke's sister, I believe at one point was also living with them. So it was 2 girls and a guy living in a house down in Florida. They were originally from Pennsylvania. And so they all moved down there for school. They moved in together, had a house together. Everything was going really well. The families were very close.
The time period where year-ish was?
This is so this happened in 2017. 2019 was when the case went to trial, but it happened in 2017.
Got it. So recent.
So yeah, so relatively recent. And like I said, the documentary came out in 2021, 22, so pretty soon after the case. But you will find out why it came out so quickly after. So they grew up in Pennsylvania together. They were like neighbors. They knew a lot about each other. I believe they went to the same high school. They were friendly. They weren't like super close, but they knew each other. They grew up together. And so they all ended up moving down to Florida to go to college. I don't believe Randy actually, like, he started off in college and then that kind of didn't work out for him. But so they're all living in this house together, sharing the rent. And a big part of the documentary is them talking about the dynamics of these two young women sharing a house with this man.
Mm-hmm.
And basically,
is this like Three's Company?
No. So that's kind of how they present it, was that there was no like flirtatiousness. No one was pretending to be gay like Jack was. It was just, this was their circumstance. They knew each other. They felt comfortable together. So they moved in together. And they were friendly. They ran in similar circles. So it seemed pretty innocent for all three of them to live together. And then, so as they're living together, they have their normal roommate stuff, but nothing significantly problematic. And so at one point while they're living together, Brooke, I want to make sure I get the names right. So Brooke is the girl who was murdered. Randy is the guy that I'm talking about. And I'm trying to find her sister's name because she becomes very important later on. Either way, Brooke and Randy are the two main people. So in the documentary, a lot of people are alleging that Randy was interested in one or both of the girls, at least Brooke, if not also her sister. But her sister was in a relationship. And then at the point of this crime occurring, Brooke had a boyfriend and was intending to move out to go live with her boyfriend up in New York. So not just move out of the house, but move out of state, move away from this whole situation. And so there was some stories from friends and family that Randy had tried to shoot a shot with Brooke and it didn't work. And so things were awkward in the house. And there's this whole story that they tell about the night before. Basically, there was kind of like this going away party situation for Brooke. And they claim that Brooke went into her room at some point during this party and Randy was standing naked in her closet.
Okay.
And so obviously that is going to make somebody be like, what the hell is going on? What's the problem? But other people were claiming that he was drunk. And so he got so trashed that, he stripped down, went to, go to bed, wound up in her closet or something like that.
Got it.
So apparently he goes to bed, party ends, Brooke is literally moving out the next day. So she's kind of, after the party's over, gathering up her stuff, things like that. So supposedly in the morning, on the March morning in 2017, he says that he was asleep and she woke him up to say goodbye. And he remembers watching her leave the room. And then he had given her a t-shirt that she left behind. So he remembers getting up, picking up the t-shirt to like bring it to her. And then he doesn't remember anything else. Then he claims that he woke up at some point thereafter, covered in blood, standing over her dead body. And there was a knife in his hand.
Okay.
And so then he decides he's going to leave the house. So he leaves the house, goes to a nearby park where he then calls 911 and tells them that whole story that I just told you. So in his defense, and I'm putting that in air quotes for anyone who is listening, he's not necessarily fleeing the scene. He's just walking away from the scene and then calling and turning himself in. He stays at the park. He's cooperative with the police. He tells them everything. They arrest him. He goes along with them. They take him to the police station. He's like, she's dead. I must have killed her. Like, look at, like, he's not trying to deny any wrongdoing in this, but he's really saying, like, I don't know what happened, but I know I must have done something because who else could have done this? And so then everybody's like, well, what the heck does this mean? So they start to try to put together a timeline that is really disjointed about what happened. So they don't know exactly what time Randy went to bed that night. But they said that in the past, he would stay up all night using drugs or alcohol and then sleep during the day. So it wouldn't necessarily be unusual for him to be up all night and then sleeping in the morning when she was getting ready to leave.
Okay.
He also definitely admitted to a significant history of using drugs and alcohol to escape a difficult family life. He had some trauma of his own. And so at the time that this was all happening, he definitely wasn't in a good place emotionally. He was using and drinking. And so he definitely was not, this innocent person that they start off by talking about him. So I'm trying to think if there was anything else relevant up to this point in the documentary. So they don't know what time he went to bed. They have both timestamps from the video that was at a neighbor's house, like of, the Ring camera or whatever, they could see their house. They have videos of Brooke leaving the home, coming back, doing things. So they know like when she was last seen alive, they know when she went into the house, and then, she never comes back out. So the timeline that they find out from the surveillance video is that we don't know what time Randy went to bed, but we know that he very easily could have stayed up all night. We do know that Randy texted Brooke in the morning between 7:45 and 8 a.m. asking her to come by and pick up the t-shirt that he had bought her, wanted to give her, like, because she was going away. My opinion, I'm going away. We've lived together. You're giving me a t-shirt? Like, mail it to me.
That's a little weird.
Yeah, it's a little weird. It's weird on many levels. I don't know. Maybe there is some sort of significance or an inside joke, but whatever.
Right.
I don't know if I would necessarily, if I'm trying to move out of state that day, I don't know if I'm making a stop at your house for a t-shirt, but whatever. So he said, come by, get the shirt. I'm going to try and stay up until you stop by. But if I go to sleep, just wake me up to say goodbye. So that's between 7:45 and 8 a.m. She arrives at the house between 8:35 and 8:37 a.m. This is, again, based on like the timestamp of stuff. And then at approximately 8:49 a.m., so less than 10 minutes later, witnesses testify hearing screaming coming from the house.
Oh, wow.
And then around 9 a.m., that's when Randy leaves the house. And at 9:05, he stops at the park and he calls 911 and says that someone has been murdered. And then when they come to the park to get him, he explains this whole story that I just told you.
It's very quick. Yeah.
Yeah. Very, very quick. And everybody, like, I just hit the mic. Sorry, guys. Everybody from like the police to the prosecutors to the defense, everybody feels like he legitimately just seems confused about what happened. Like he doesn't seem like he's trying to lie, but he's not.
Right.
Like he's got these big blanks in the story that don't add up, but he's also not trying to defend himself. And so everybody thought like, he's not trying to hide anything. He's trying to be as honest as he can. He just doesn't know what the hell happened.
Jeez.
So he claims that the last thing he remembers is Brooke coming in the house, getting the shirt, leaving his room, and then he woke up. And then after that was the waking up covered in blood. So they think that it's kind of unusual that if someone was trying to get out of a crime, that they would give those 2 points in time as recall, because it's basically saying like, I'm the only one who was there who could have done it.
Right.
So that was kind of suspicious. So the defense team is like, oh, well, he must have been asleep. He must have been sleepwalking. And so they did have a history of, just knowing his medical history, that he had been quite a sleepwalker for most of his life. So that was not unknown, but it was never officially diagnosed. So it was witnessed by his mother and his sister on several occasions. He was never violent, but they knew that he'd been sleepwalking. On one occasion, his mother said that he rode a bicycle while he was sleeping.
Okay.
It's not unusual. It's possible. But they feel like it was a combination of amnesia of the murder from sleepwalking. Like he wasn't fully conscious. So that's what
I told you I have a sleepwalking child, so now I'm going to have nightmares about murderous children.
I'll get into that. So there's no need to worry. So then, of course, the prosecutors are like, no, he did this on purpose. He's a sexual pervert. Like he was hiding in her closet naked. Like he wanted her and she was moving away to be with this guy, and he was jealous. So he wanted to have sex with her and she turned him down. So he killed her in a fit of rage and upset.
Right.
That doesn't necessarily add up either, because there's no kind of history other than that one incident the night before. There's no history of him trying to initiate some sort of sexual relationship with either of the girls who lived in the home.
Right.
And they don't 100% go into it in the documentary, but it seems like they're alluding to the fact that they either thought that he was gay, like just not attracted to the women, or that he was asexual and just not sexually attracted to anyone. They don't go into it too much. And I feel like
I don't think that matters.
Just another excuse. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
It didn't really seem relevant to the case, because whether he was sexually attracted to her or not, he still killed her.
Right.
And it wasn't like she wasn't naked. He wasn't undressed. There was no semen on the scene. So there was no sight of, a sexual assault being involved in any of this. So why are we even talking about this? It shouldn't matter. And so essentially, I'm not going to go down the whole rabbit hole of how court works, but most people who listen, or most people in general, have seen Law and Order or one of those crime shows. So there needs to be reasonable doubt as the standard for guilt. So you need to be able to convict someone without reasonable doubt, saying that they definitely did it. There's no doubt in my mind they did it.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're thinking about all the stuff that I've laid out, there's a lot of doubt one way or the other. Like both sides don't really have a solid case.
Right.
So some of the things that were considered in the case was that he had no history of violence or aggression. Brooke's parents knew him since he was a child and never saw him be violent or aggressive. They always liked him. They didn't see how any of this made sense. Like I said, he had a history of sleepwalking as a child, including those complex activities like riding a bike, which I'll get into complex activities and sleepwalking in a minute.
One quick question. I forgot. I don't know if we mentioned this. How old were all these characters at the time?
They are in their 20s.
Roughly in their 20s. Okay. I'm trying to, like what is their maturity level? Where are we in life?
They're definitely adults. They're all college age kids, but they're not, 30, 40 years old. I'd say early to mid 20s.
Okay.
And it's funny because it doesn't have their age here on this, but either way, that's where they're at. Okay. Which honestly, that's probably something to take into account when we're talking about sleepwalking in a minute, because there are certain ages where it's more developmentally appropriate than other ages for sleepwalking, or more expected. I wouldn't say developmentally appropriate for anyone, but it's more common in childhood is what I'm getting at. So basically they were trying to say that he did this. And then there's this whole big part of the documentary that is uber frustrating, both as a psychologist and someone who knows just a tiny little bit about sleep. They're trying to look at the typical sleep cycle. Mm-hmm. And it's not so typical. We can have averages of 1 to 2 hours of sleep, and what is normal sleep architecture? That's the wake sleep cycles. There's no set definite thing that should be expected. So trying to throw that in for the jury, for the judge to consider, I feel like it was just smoke and mirrors, trying to distract from that this was a murder one way or the other.
We did not find that he took Ambien, correct? Right.
Not that we know of. He did have a history of other drug use, though. We don't. But
just because Ambien's known for sleepwalking and complex behaviors in adults, so
that does not come up in this.
Okay, I would think they would figure that out if Yeah.
The only thing that comes up is that he had been a drinker. He had been using drugs, not using drugs the night before, but definitely had been drinking because there was that big party. Mm-hmm. And then just the whole thing about it wasn't like he was trying to get away with it. He was confessing right away, and he, told them everything. He essentially handed himself over to the police. The only unusual thing he did was actually leave the scene of the crime, but he immediately called the police. So thank God I've never been in that situation, but I could see someone getting really freaked out. I can't stand here with the body and then, going somewhere nearby. Something that was really interesting was that the prosecutor never called the chief detective on the case as a witness in trial. So it's well, why would you not call that person up?
Right.
And ask about this stuff.
Maybe
and then,
some
like
holes.
I mentioned before, some holes in the case, definitely. Yeah. And the description of the events didn't really line up the way someone who is legitimately sleepwalking would describe an event. It was very disjointed. I remember this, I don't remember this. Where when you're in and out of sleepwalking, you might have a little bit more or a little bit less information. It was it just wasn't consistent with what would be expected if sleepwalking was at play. One thing is important to realize, though, in this, Randy never claimed that he was sleepwalking. This was his defense that brought that up. They were trying to explain why he couldn't remember pieces of it.
Okay.
So he never said he wasn't sleepwalking either. But the whole sleepwalking defense was not his idea.
Right.
So I think that's really relevant too to this whole situation. And then I mentioned the thing with the closet, naked in the closet, because this part is important that you don't find out till later in the documentary. Not only had he been in her closet and nude, they're not entirely sure he was awake at that point. They think he might have been either fully drunk or sleepwalking at that time. And then apparently he had woken up and been in her closet before and urinated in the closet, thinking in sleep that it was a bathroom.
Yeah.
So that complicates things as well.
Right.
Because then it changes the whole perspective of him being in the closet naked. Maybe he was trashed. He went to sleep naked. He had to pee. He wandered in there. She found him in there and then he woke up. There could be other things going on. So what do you think they did? You think he got prosecuted?
I mean, I would say no. Well, it depends also on the charge. Are they saying murder, manslaughter? What? You know what I mean? There's different standards, right? This wasn't a planned murder. That's for sure. Right. I mean, manslaughter or some sort of other offshoot. Like, I don't know all the definitions of the law. Maybe if it was one of those. But straight up murder. No.
But you're forgetting the main thing. He confessed.
Yes.
So murder or manslaughter doesn't matter. He's still going to prison. It's just how much time. So that's really what they were all arguing over, was how much time he was going to get.
Do you know, does it say what the actual official charge was? You know what I mean? Because, like, the prosecutor...
I don't have it. Yeah, it's been a while since I watched the documentary, so I don't remember exactly.
Because there are different definitions, right? Yes. Like, I'm not a law person, but I listen and watch a lot of true crime.
Depends
right.
on, yeah.
But there is, like, a different definition.
Murder in the first degree implies intent.
Right.
Manslaughter does not. It implies that there was no intent, but you are taking responsibility for the crime. So,
yes. So manslaughter I could
he was
see.
Definitely going to get it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So he did go to prison, and the jury wasn't totally sold that he was sleepwalking, but there was also, it sounds like there was still some reasonable doubt, but because he was admitting to a crime, it was really between that murder in the first degree versus manslaughter. So he did go to prison for manslaughter. And at no point has he ever said he was innocent. So it's like, after watching the whole documentary, I'm just like, well,
but there's no, but there's no,
what was the point?
What's the word? Not motivation. There's no, my brain is.
There's no motive. No, you're right.
Motive. I'm like motivation, motive. Yeah, there's no motive. Yeah. Like there's no
motive. And throughout, he always said he thinks he was awake. So he said, and I have a quote from the trial transcript. And this is from, I think it's the police saying what he said in his interview. He said, "I think I was awake. Well, I don't know. I'm a little hazy about it. I don't know. I might have been vividly dreaming. No." And then in the trial, they say no. Every time you heard the defendant say it himself, both in his clinical interviews and the doctors, he always said he was awake. So again, that's why I said before, the sleepwalking defense was not his idea.
Interesting. But just blacking out, drunken blacking out. I mean,
I said before, he did admit to using drugs, using alcohol, often staying up a lot of the night and sleeping during the day. So definitely there were things that were contributing to a disrupted sleep cycle that could cause him to be more likely to sleepwalk. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it was sleepwalking that caused him to murder her.
Right.
But then, like you said, no motive. He was remorseful from the start. He never, showed any ill will towards her. The only thing people can think of is that she was moving out to be with another man. But again,
brief psychotic episode. Is that a thing? That's a thing, right?
It is.
Brief psychotic episode. There you go. Brought on by drugs and sleep disturbance. I don't know.
No, you're right, but that's essentially what they were claiming. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the criticism and the controversy about the documentary itself. So this is bizarre to me because I've watched this documentary, I believe 2 full times, maybe like 2.5 times. Because there were a couple parts of it I couldn't remember in the beginning. So I watched like a part of it when I was prepping for the podcast. Clearly not all of it because I'm a little, whatever. We're not going to get into it. I did my work. I did my homework. But Brooke, the victim, her family is throughout it. They're all through this documentary doing interviews, talking about the case, talking about their daughter. You see them in court. They are a huge part of this documentary voluntarily. They knew.
Right.
The documentary comes out, and her sister, who used to live with them, posted a TikTok saying that Hulu was forcing her and her family to relive the worst days of her life.
I mean, no.
And that they had refused
and I'm sure you got
to be interviewed for, participate in, or give consent to the making of the documentary. Yet
So
y'all are in it.
What did they do? Tie you up? I mean,
They were sleepwalking in it apparently as well.
Yeah. And I bet you got paid for it too.
They probably did. Mm-hmm. So then the film was heavily criticized by her family. Basically, so the other family members who were clearly in the documentary, they are criticizing it more for saying that we thought it was going to be neutral and it's clearly in favor of him. Mm-hmm. I don't think the documentary is clearly in favor of him. I think it's clearly in favor of, hey, this defense doesn't add up.
Right.
Versus saying he didn't do it. And so as of January 5th, 2022, 100,000 people had signed a petition demanding Hulu remove the film from streaming. Well, it's 2025 and it's still up there, folks. So that petition didn't go anywhere. But I think it is exactly because, like I said, Brooke's sister, Jordan, is claiming that her family wanted nothing to do with it. But there are family members in this documentary clearly being interviewed. So maybe they thought the documentary is going to be something different, and that's what she's talking about. But her one TikTok video wasn't adding up either. So there's a lot of things here that don't add up. That being said, this family lost their daughter. It is a terrible experience. I don't know if I would necessarily sign up for a documentary one way or another if I was in that. I would have said no thank you completely.
Right.
So we don't know what those things leading up to them being part of the documentary, like how that happened, or maybe all that stuff that we see of them was taken from public footage, from like the news or, you know, the trial. So it's kind of hard to tell, but they're in the documentary. Yeah. And I don't think that was ever a secret that they were going to be in the documentary.
Right.
So let's talk about sleepwalking, also known as somnambulism.
So I definitely was a sleepwalker. I was. My mother has stories. I used to come down the stairs, and it was like a combo sleepwalking, sleep terror thing. I'd be in the middle of like a bad dream. And of course, even though she, you know, do you wake a sleepwalker or do you not? And then, you know, the next day, of course, I didn't remember it. And now I have a child who does the same. And I literally put a bell on her door of her room because when it's just, when it's both my husband and I listening, I feel like, all right. And my other daughter, I'm like, all right, we're good. But like when he was away for business and I'm like, I'm just so afraid I won't hear her. And it always happens early in the night and he's typically still awake when it happens. So he's downstairs, I'm upstairs. So we put a bell on her door. Like we took a bell that we use for the dog to ring to go out. We put it on her door because I'm so afraid that I'm going to miss it. And she's going to be like out in the street. When we went just on our vacation, I told you, we didn't tell the whole pod, but we stayed in these really cool tree houses, really amazing in Tennessee in the Smoky Mountains. We had to put, because her and my other daughter were staying in a separate like building of the tree house sort of. So we put like a half full water bottle on the doorknob so that it would fall and make a noise. So the other kid would hear her if she slept well, because I was so afraid she was going to be like walking off the deck of a tree in the middle of the night.
Yeah. So interestingly, in the documentary, they talk about a few other sleepwalking cases that had helped kind of build this defense. And one of them is the story of a woman who was sleepwalking. She left her house, got in her car, started her car, drove her car, and drove it into a lake and drowned. And so it was showing that people can do these complex mannerisms while they're sleepwalking. But in that situation, she harmed herself, not someone else.
Right.
And so there have been I wouldn't say many, but there have been enough cases for us to know that people can be violent in their sleepwalking, but it is not common. So in general, sleepwalking, it is a sleep disorder called somnambulism. It is essentially what it sounds like. People get up, walk around in their sleep. It is much more common in children than adults, and children usually outgrow sleepwalking by around the teenage years. Some people it lasts a little bit longer, but most people, if you've had it at one point, you tend to grow out of it. If it happens once in a while, not a big problem. There's really no treatment. You just let it happen. But if it's something that's happening frequently, that can suggest an underlying sleep disorder because your body and your brain are not resting and getting what you need to get through the day. So if this is now happening time after time after time, it's going to have other effects, not just, you got up in the middle of the night and walked around. Sleepwalking in adults is often part of another sleep disorder. If it's happening in adulthood, it's usually connected to a medical condition or something else. It can be a medication side effect, like you were saying, for Ambien. Right. And so if you're having someone who's an adult sleepwalking often, that's something that you want to check into because that can be more dangerous. Like I said, you can get in your car and drive or things like that.
How about substance use? Is that correlated as well? Like,
yes.
Yeah.
I'll get to it.
Okay. Sorry, I'm jumping.
So the symptoms of sleepwalking, it usually occurs early in the night. So about 1 to 2 hours after falling asleep. So earlier in your sleep cycle. It's not going to happen during a nap. Typically it can happen, but usually not often because if you're napping, your sleep cycle is slightly different. I'm not going to get into all the sleep science stuff, but it typically tends not to happen during naps. And then a bout of sleepwalking tends to happen for several minutes. It can last a little bit longer, but usually not, much longer than 10, 15 minutes. So people who are sleepwalking can get up and out of bed, walk around. They may just sit up in bed and open their eyes, have a glazed, glassy-eyed expression, not respond or talk to others, be hard to wake up. They can be very confused for a short time after fully waking up, not remembering that they've sleepwalked, have difficulty functioning during the day because they're not getting that full amount of sleep. And then they can also have sleep terrors, which typically the hallmark for that would be screaming, waving of arms and legs. Sleep paralysis is different. That'll be a whole nother talk.
Oh,
There's a
that's
really great
another
movie
one
about that.
I also have a spouse with that sometimes. So I got all this
scary.
I got all the sleep stuff in my house.
Yeah. Maybe we need to look into what's going on environmentally in your house if there's a lot of sleep disorders going on.
I'm good now. I don't sleepwalk anymore. I think it was the same age too. It was around 9-10 years old, I think. So
yeah. So people who sleepwalk, they can do their normal activities like get up, get dressed, eat, talk, but usually they're not like having a conversation like we are. They may just be talking and no one's there or saying, their normal things. So I think part of that is important for people to realize. A lot of times the things that these people are doing while they're sleepwalking are typical normal things of the daily routine. So if you would think if you or I was sleepwalking, I might get up, go downstairs, put on a pot of coffee, get ready for work, but it's, 2 a.m. and I'm asleep because these are routine activities. So there's not as much thought and brain power going into it. It's a lot of automatic stuff that we do. They could also take part in what is called, quote unquote, unusual behavior, such as passing urine in the closet. My theory with that is that they think that they're in the bathroom. It's more of a understanding where you are in space.
Yeah. I mean, but that's interesting. You hear that a lot. Like I have heard that urinating in a weird place in a closet specifically a lot.
Yeah. But if you think about it, next to the closet, the bathroom is probably one of the smallest rooms in the house.
Right.
So I could see how mistaking that if you're not fully conscious.
Yeah. So interesting.
You can get injured because you can fall down the stairs. Jumping out of windows has happened. I don't know too many stories about that, so I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. And people can become briefly violent when confused after waking up. So we're going to get more into the violence during sleepwalking because it can happen, but not in the way that it's talked about in the documentary.
Okay.
So, like I said, when you would see a doctor is if it's happening frequently, if you're getting injured while you're sleepwalking, if it's impacting your ability to function during the day. Factors that can lead to sleepwalking: stress, fever, sleep schedule disruptions, travel, sleep interruptions, not getting enough sleep, substance use, especially alcohol, restless legs, GERD, certain medicines like we were talking about, hypnotic, sedatives, a lot of mental health medications can exacerbate sleepwalking. It's usually if you already kind of do it and then you're taking this medication, it might happen more.
Yeah.
But if you've grown out of it, it's unlikely.
I wonder if those ones that cause like vivid dreams, like Chantix for smoking cessation, I think that's probably one that can do it too.
Yeah. And then some factors for sleepwalking, why some people get it where others. It can run in families. It's more common if one parent has a history of sleepwalking, and then obviously even more common if both parents have some sort of sleep disorder, not necessarily just sleepwalking. So,
yeah.
There you go. Yep. And then, like I said before, tends to happen more often in children than adults. If it's starting for the first time in adulthood, it's definitely going to be a sign of something else going on.
Yeah.
So that's somnambulism in a nutshell. Help, I'm in a nutshell. Sorry, every time I say in a nutshell, I always think that. And then things to do if you or someone you love is a sleepwalker, you want to make sure that they are safety first. So like you were saying, try to do something to keep them in a safe area, make sure they're not leaving. Oh, I'm sorry. Another cause of sleepwalking, which I should know because I worked in this field, brain injury can definitely mess with your sleep and perpetuate any new sleep disorders. Especially
also,
encephalitis can cause a lot of sleep issues.
Alzheimer's patients too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's an acquired brain injury, essentially. Your brain is changing.
And their day-night gets screwy. And I actually currently have a patient who the poor, wife's been dealing with that, trying to make sure he stays in the house kind of thing.
Yeah. And so ways to treat it, like I was saying before, there's cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, which is really just going to address sleep issues in general. Even though it's called CBTI, it can just talk about how to improve your sleep in general. So it can treat that. even though it sounds counterintuitive, there's certain medications you can take to reduce sleepwalking, but those are not things that should be taken long term. It should just be a short-term fix. Improving your sleep hygiene, anticipatory waking. So this is something we've all had, where it's like you get up at 6 a.m. every morning, you don't set your alarm, and now suddenly it's 5:55 and you're restless and you're kind of waking up. So that anticipatory waking is kind of your body gets set into a schedule.
Right, but no, there's a technique which we tried and backfired, anticipatory waking, meaning 2 hours after said person has fallen asleep, wake them right before the sleepwalking usually occurs.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then it backfired and turned
off at the path. Yeah.
But it backfired in our house and turned into like a weird sleep terror thing that was not good. I'm like, never again. Just let it happen.
And then, like you were saying, like putting bed alarms, door alarms, motion sensor lights, remove tripping hazards from the floor, closing or latching doors or windows, trying to close off stairways if you can, if it's possible, removing sharp objects and weapons out of reach. So, and you're laughing, but I've heard of so many people who sleep with a gun beside their bed or under their pillow, or knives. And a lot of times those people have had trauma, and so that's why. But still, if you're a sleepwalker, you don't want that stuff readily available, and then you don't know what you're doing with it, or even just accidentally injuring yourself.
Accidentally, yeah.
So, violent behavior and sleepwalking. According to a review of studies completed in the journal called Sleep, capital SLEEP, all capital letters, they said that violent behavior tends to occur in slightly different ways in sleepwalking versus sleep terrors or confusional arousal. So in sleepwalking alone, the violence occurs after the sleepwalking episode is triggered and underway. So it's not like you start sleepwalking, immediately murder somebody and whatever. You're already sleepwalking and it's happening during the course of the sleepwalking. And so the important part about that is that this person is moving through the environment. And so a lot of times that violent behavior is triggered by coming in contact with another person and being like startled. So it's almost like a startle response, but they're still not fully awake, but it's like in their sleep, dream, sleepwalking, whatever, they're just going about their day. And then all of a sudden there's a person there. And so now you're scared. But a lot of times, even then, that violence tends to be pushing, hitting, punching, not grabbing a knife from the kitchen block,
Right. That's that next step right there.
Exactly. Which again, we don't know where the knife came from, where he got it from. Like maybe, unfortunately, he's one of those guys that sleeps with a knife, near his bed. People do it. I know it sounds bizarre to some folks, but it is something that it's not like I've never heard it before. I've heard it quite frequently, honestly. Violence during sleep terrors is very different. And this tends to be when the person is kicking and thrashing as part of their sleep terror. And then that causes violence or aggression towards someone who comes to kind of try to calm them or soothe them. And then confusional arousal is when you are waking up or have just woken up, but you're not fully there. And so if someone then interacts with you, then you may be confused and then lash out towards them. So they're all different types of violence during that sleep issue, but they look very different and occur at very different times. So taking that into account, it doesn't sound like this case is any one of those.
Yeah. It's strange.
At best, it's that confusional arousal where maybe he was just like sort of awake, but
the confusional arousal. I mean, so this is just my own experience. This is not medical whatsoever. So husband with sleep paralysis always thinks there's an intruder. Like that's his repeated feeling. And then he's paralyzed and he's trying to say something and he can't move and he's like, oh, whatever. And then child who sleepwalks, if startled, goes into a sleep terror. So like, I don't know, like that incubus, succubus, dark person across the room, like you don't recognize who's there, even though they're in front of you. Because I've had this where child like recognizes me and then doesn't recognize me. And then could this all have been accidental? Like, you know what I mean? Like he was sleepwalking, drinking, startled arousal, confused of who was in front of him, thought it was an intruder. Like that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, the other thing that we haven't even covered, and it's not really talked about much in the documentary, and I think it's too much of a deep dive to go into here, but like when we're dreaming, when we're sleeping, we're still ourselves. So maybe he had some resentment for her moving out. Maybe there were some negative feelings that he was suppressing during daytime, but then when you're sleeping, those inhibitions are lowered, and so maybe some of that was coming out, even if he didn't mean to intentionally harm or kill her. Maybe he was really upset with her because she was leaving him and leaving their little cute roommate hood. And he, like I said, he was having a lot of trauma in his life. A lot of things were not going well, so definitely under a high amount of stress.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to go through it now because I've been talking for a long time already.
Okay.
But in the show notes, there's a really good article talking about the functional neuroanatomy that goes into difficulty with sleep, specifically aggression during sleep. There can be brain lesions, there can be changes in the cerebral spinal fluid, all different kinds of things that can impact impulsive violence in sleep. That's what they're calling it, impulsive violence during sleepwalking. So with that, that's even important too, because if we're saying if someone is harming someone, if someone is being violent in their sleep, we're saying it's impulsive. So this is not something that is premeditated, that is thought out. So using that as a defense alone is already going to be one of those mitigating factors, that it was an impulsive act versus a premeditated act.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I've got to say about that. I definitely want to at some point talk about that Night Terrors documentary I'd mentioned to you, because they do go into that whole mythological incubus, succubus thing, and why that was created and what it really means for us when we're having those sleep problems, which is really fascinating in and of itself. And I really like that documentary because I told you it talks about it's a real person who lives near where we used to live, where we all grew up. And so it's kind of cool to like hear a story of somebody who was close to home having these night terrors. There's even this one scene where like they show a shot of the street, and I'm like, we all have been down that street before.
Oh,
like,
wow.
we know it.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
So that's the brain is so crazy. And you chose to study it.
And I can also talk about narcolepsy one day. That's a different one too.
Yeah.
That one's trickier, but we got lots of ideas to.
I have an interesting patient experience who now is diagnosed with narcolepsy, but was using opioids for many, many years, and they thought that they were falling asleep because they were nodding out. But then they were clean for multiple years and it was still happening. And so it was quite interesting because they were like, oh, wait, this wasn't the drugs. This is actually something else.
Or maybe it was something they originally had and the drugs made it worse.
Right. But the brain, it's crazy. It's crazy. I study lots of parts of the body. The brain is definitely the craziest of all of them.
It is. It's the most fascinating, and it controls every single thing we do, and that's why I love talking about it. Speaking about the brain, I haven't watched it yet, but new season of Black Mirror's got some trippy ass stuff on it.
Yeah.
And I might need to. I mean, there's some old Black Mirror episodes that I would love to cover. But I feel like then it would become all that Nicole talks about is Black Mirror because I'm obsessed with that show.
What is the old, now this is that they say it's similar. My brain is not going to think about it. The old, yes. I'm like the old show that had these vignettes. Mm-hmm. Okay. And there's some lot of freaky stuff on Twilight Zone that could probably be psychological for sure.
Well, and even the newer Twilight Zone by Jordan Peele has a lot of like really good stuff. And there's this show called Roar. It's a short-term series. I think there's like 4 or 5 episodes, all by women directors, all about women experiences. But it definitely has a little bit of a Twilight Zone-y feel to it. I watched one episode where, long story short, it's about this African-American woman, and she suddenly becomes super successful in Hollywood, and she's networking and she's wheeling and she's dealing, and then all of a sudden she's showing up in these meetings and people literally can't see her. It's like she's invisible. And so I was like, wow, like she got her seat at the table. Now nobody can see her. Like, what the hell? Like, it was very trippy, very cool.
That's very trippy. All right. Well, more trippy things to come, I guess, on the pod. We just got to get the word out there. So all of our listeners, this is my appeal. Tell 3 friends.
3 friends? What if they don't have 3 friends? Tell 3 strangers.
Tell 3 people. You can Google
what if
our
you have
name.
Social anxiety? Write it down and
write
give
it down.
People.
Pass it to like a note at the bank
No
teller.
excuses. Everyone can do this.
Tell your Starbucks barista that that's your name, and they'll write it on your
on
cup.
your socials. You don't have to talk to anybody to do that.
But literally, if you just tell them the name, you can Google us, and the first thing that comes up is links to Apple, Spotify, iHeart, So
yeah,
just tell the peeps. Yes, tell the peeps, spread the word so we can keep doing what we're doing. We're going to have a little meeting at some point and come up with some more stuff for you guys. Maybe some bonus content, maybe some sort of incentivized extras. So, yeah.
Also, we've got our contest that I know that's wrapping up soon. Do you want to remind all of our listeners about the contest?
I think this might air after the contest. I have to look at our
but we haven't picked our winner yet, so we can still say.
There's a good chance this contest is going to be extended into the next month because we don't have anybody doing it. Yeah, this comes out May 5th. So this comes out in May.
Oh, no.
So technically the contest will be over, but check our socials, specifically Instagram, because we may extend it because I don't know. People don't understand. Like, there's not that many people. Your chances of winning are very high.
I was going to say the odds are ever in your favor. Like, what?
Yes.
Come on, people.
So check our Instagram. You don't have to
volunteer to be tribute to win.
You know what's funny? In the airport, somebody totally quoted that while I was reading the newest book, which is I told you about that, the prequel. And I was like, and somebody quoted it.
I haven't started that one yet. I need to get it.
You need to do it. It's really good. So yes, follow us on our socials, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, Pinterest. All of them.
Most ridiculous one of all. Yes. And yes, email us. Shoot us emails to medicalmediamixer@gmail.com. I check the email box every other day. Nobody's there. Except for our friend from Tennessee.
Yes. Go Tammy and go Laura.
Yes.
They get shout outs. They actually emailed us.
Yeah.
All right.
It took all of 5 seconds of their time and they showed us love and we appreciate them.
Yes. All right. So thank you for listening to Medical Media Mixer.
The perfect cocktail. Cheers.
Cheers.
My drink's empty.